There is so much fun to be had when driving a supercar.
Hi, what can I hear for you?
Hi, can I get a number 2 with no mayo on the burger and baked potato instead of fries, please? But with that said, as fun as it is to drive and own a supercar, there's also things about it that can be incredibly annoying that nobody talks about, and you honestly wouldn't know unless you've owned one yourself. And I guess I should quickly mention that I'm currently driving an AMG GTR. Does this qualify as a supercar? I guess that's a matter of opinion, but I have also owned a couple different Lamborghinis, currently own a Huracan Performante, so I do have my fair share of experience with supercar ownership. So I guess we'll start with the big one, and that is the unwanted attention that does come along with owning and driving a supercar. It doesn't matter where you are, I guarantee you, somebody is going to want to talk to you either about your car or about yourself. And I guess to be fair, you kind of bring that unwanted attention upon yourself by driving around in a bright red Ferrari. I definitely think that the supercar stereotype of the guy that's more interested in being seen in the car rather than actually driving the car is very much true. I've met plenty of those people. I'd like to think that I'm not one of them, given the fact that most of the time I go out and drive cars like this, I'm not actually going anywhere. I'm just driving the car because I enjoy driving the car. With that said, a lot of people will still automatically assume that you're a douche. And it pretty much doesn't matter where you go. Obviously, if you go somewhere where it's a lot busier, you're going to draw more attention. And as soon as you get out of your car, there's going to be people that want to talk to you, they want to talk about your car, they want to ask you questions about your life that you may or may not want to give up to a complete stranger. When driving a supercar, every trip to the gas station is an experience. Common conversation starters or comments include but are not limited to: nice car, want to trade, want to race, how fast have you gone, how much does your car cost, how much horsepower does that have, nice rental, what do you do for work, what kind of gas mileage does that car get, how much does your insurance cost, where do you live. Needless to say, very few conversations start with a simple "how are you?" It's understandable why people would be curious, but at that point it's totally up to you in terms of how much information you want to give up, again, to a complete stranger. I can tell you from personal experience, when I get a sense that somebody is asking me about the car and they're legitimately a car guy, I'm more than happy to talk to that person. I've honestly stood in random parking lots for half an hour talking to people about cars, but when people just want to know more about my personal life or what I do for work, just out of the blue, I'm a lot less inclined to talk to them. But what about actually driving the car? Well, there is one thing that you will immediately notice upon being in a supercar for about 5 minutes, and that is all the other drivers around you. I've been saying this for a long time, but if the cops really want to hand out a bunch of tickets for distracted, unsafe driving, they need to go buy a fleet of Ferraris and Lamborghinis, leave them unmarked, and just drive around, because the stuff you see when driving a supercar that other drivers do on the road, either to get a video or to get a better look at your car, is pretty shocking. On a single lane road, it's typically not too bad. Worst case scenario is somebody starts to tailgate you because they want to get a better look at the car, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but I always have it in the back of my mind that in a situation like that, should I have to stop for some kind of an emergency, a squirrel runs across the road, if I slam on my brakes, my very expensive supercar brakes will probably stop my car a lot more quickly than the guy behind me, which could result in you getting rear-ended. Just something to think about. When you're on a multi-lane road like a highway, for example, let's just say that you need to be paying attention. There's typically a few things that are going to happen in this situation. One is that all the drivers around you, or at least some of them, are going to drive as fast as possible, either because they were behind you and they're trying to catch up to get a better look at the car, or because they somehow think that you're going to be impressed that they're driving faster in their normal car than you are in your supercar. The second thing that's going to happen is that someone is almost always in your blind spot, which when you're in a front engine car like this, it's typically not too bad, but when you're in most mid-engine cars where your blind spots are humongous, you can't really see the people that are driving in your blind spot, because typically for the driver, that is the ideal spot for them to be checking out your car while also driving, not realizing that they're in your blind spot and you can barely see them at all. Another thing that's typically going to happen is people are going to want to race you, either rolling races bridges or at a stoplight, it's a pretty common thing to get those kind of challenges. One other thing you need to be aware of in regards to other drivers when in a supercar is that people will legitimately try to follow you home. So make sure when you're not too far from home, you pay attention to who's behind you and how long they've been behind you and whether or not they're potentially following you to your house. However, by far the worst situation that you can be in when driving a supercar is being stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic. I don't think anybody in the world likes being sat in traffic, but when you're sat in a supercar, what always ends up happening is you get boxed in because all the other drivers who are also stuck in traffic, because they have nothing better to do, they figure they might as well get as close as possible to the supercar so they can get a better look, not realizing that they have boxed you in, you can't change lanes, you have nowhere to go, meaning that if you are trying to weave through the traffic and maybe get to your destination a little bit more quickly, it's probably not going to happen. Also, being stuck in traffic in a supercar will also make you realize how uncomfortable a supercar actually is. Also, when you're stopped at a light, it's pretty common for people to ask you to rev your engine, which is fine in most situations, but all I'll say is be aware of your surroundings, because if a cop sees you doing that, you're probably going to get pulled over. The next thing that nobody ever talks about, and this is a really big one for me, is parking. I think everyone's levels of paranoia when it comes to parking lots and door dings, things of that nature, is a little bit different, but I can tell you for myself that I am very paranoid about somebody hitting my car with their door, or honestly just leaving the car unattended in general. And I'm not like that just with my Lamborghini. I'm like that with pretty much every car that I've ever owned, regardless of how expensive it is. I just don't like putting my car in a risky situation where I could pick up a door ding or damage the paint or something like that. So with that in mind, what I typically like to do, supercar or not, is park pretty much as far away from everybody as I possibly can. And that solution when you're driving a normal car typically works quite well, but when you're driving a supercar, even if it's not being driven, just sat at the back of a parking lot, it's going to draw attention. And I can't explain this phenomenon, but people will somehow find their way to park directly next to you in an empty parking lot, even if you're all the way in the back. It's pretty incredible, actually. And again, it's one of those things that I do understand, because prior to owning cars like this, I would get excited when I saw a supercar in a parking lot as well. I don't think I ever went as far as to parking directly next to it, but it is something that people will do. And often people aren't the best at parking, so they end up parking a lot closer to your car than you'd like them to be. And a lot of people also don't realize this, and I guess this is kind of just whining for the sake of whining, but when you're in a supercar, if the doors don't go up, the doors are typically going to be pretty long. So because the car is already quite low and the doors are quite long, you kind of need to open the door up a little bit wider to get in and out a little bit more easily. So when someone does park directly next to you and they're a little bit closer than they should be, getting in and out of your car becomes incredibly challenging. And to be clear, I'm not looking for sympathy here, I'm just saying it the way that it is. What I would strongly not recommend doing, and I see this far too often, is parking your supercar right at the front and taking up 2 spots. If you are worried about somebody coming up and keying your car or door dinging it or hitting it with a shopping cart, if you do something like that, it is going to encourage the people that would actually go that far to go that far. Just realize that every time you leave your car unattended, it is at risk of potentially being damaged. I can't tell you how many people I've seen touch my car in a parking lot. I've had people sit on the hood, and I even had this one guy, I'll remember this for the rest of my life. He parked next to my car way too close in an empty parking lot. It was a Lamborghini Huracan. He then proceeded to get out of the car with his small child, pick up said small child, and then hold him above the back engine cover so he could look through the glass to see the engine, literally dangling a kid over top of my Lamborghini. No harm done at the end of the day, but that's the type of stuff people will do when you leave your car unattended. Now, up until this point, we've talked a lot about other people, which brings us to my next point, which is you as the driver in your supercar. You have a tremendous amount of responsibility. If you're buying a supercar, then you probably have some desire to go fast, which is fine, but you have to realize that when you go fast, not only are you putting yourself at risk, but you are putting everyone else at a tremendous amount of risk as well. Just like everyone else, I played the Need for Speeds and the midnight clubs, driving recklessly through traffic in video game form. It's a lot of fun, but in real life, that is a seriously dangerous thing to do, and every time I see it happening, either in real life or on videos on YouTube, it irks me. When you're in a high traffic area with lots of pedestrians and street lights and stop signs, perhaps even just a regular neighborhood, that is absolutely 100% not the place to drive fast ever. At this point, there has to be well over 100 cars that you can go out and buy that will hit 0 to 60 in 3 seconds or less, which is tremendously fast, meaning that in areas where you shouldn't be able to achieve these speeds, you're able to hit them very, very quickly. And the faster you're going, the easier it is to make a mistake. Someone steps out on the road, someone does something unpredictable. You are also driving in an unpredictable way by driving extremely fast in a zone where you shouldn't be driving really fast. It's just a recipe for disaster. And God forbid you injure somebody else, you injure yourself. It's just not a situation that I think you should put yourself in. If you want to drive quickly on the road in your supercar, something that I do all the time, make sure you do it in an area where it is safe to do so, or at the very least, if you are going to screw up, it's your life on the line and nobody else's. Just don't be reckless and don't put other people's lives at risk for your own personal enjoyment. Wow, that got really serious really quick. Which brings me to my final point, and that is driver skill. Anybody with enough money can go to a dealership and buy a supercar, but that does not mean that they have the driver skill required to drive said car quickly in a safe manner. There are countless videos on YouTube of people picking up their brand new supercar, putting it on the road, and then proceeding to launch the car directly into a tree. These are typically people that are overconfident in their own driving ability or simply didn't know how to drive in the first place. And when you give somebody a car with 5, 6, 700 horsepower like a lot of these supercars have now, that's typically a recipe for disaster if you're trying to drive fast without the ability to drive fast. Now, do not get me wrong here. I'm not saying that I'm some kind of world-class race car driver, because that's not the case at all. But as soon as I started getting into these really fast cars, I made it a point that I would go to driving schools and do track days with an instructor and really get an idea of not only what the car that I have is capable of, but just to have a better understanding and ability to drive the car in the first place. If you can afford a supercar, then you can afford to go to a couple track days with an instructor and learn how to drive it properly. Honestly, I think these cars have gotten so fast and are so dangerous at this point that it should be mandatory that you go through a certain driving school that does have some kind of a pass-fail system before you actually can drive the car on your own. That's obviously not the situation right now, but I think for your own sake, if you do plan on owning a supercar, perhaps own one right now, it is definitely in your best interest to get on a track with somebody that really knows what they're doing, having them instruct you, and really getting a basic idea of how to drive a car properly and what the limits are of your car. Because if you're aware of all of that, I think it's much safer not only for yourself, but also for everyone else on the road. And there you have it. That is pretty much everything that they don't tell you about owning and driving a supercar. If you guys enjoyed this video, please support it with a like. That helps me out tremendously. If you have any questions regarding anything that I talked about or any suggestions for other videos on the Car Problems channel, please leave that down below in the comments. If you're not subscribed and don't want to miss out on future car content from me, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on the next upload. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.